Ed, as you know, Easter is coming this Sunday, and it's one of those painful holidays for me.
Really?
Yes, I've had a bad experience with Easter many years ago
Wow.
when I was a young lad.
I can't wait to hear about this.
I told Jen this the other day, and she laughed at me. But anyways, this happened probably in 1985, and every year my family would go down to Florida for spring break. And this particular year, Easter fell during that spring break, so we celebrated Easter there.
Mm-hmm.
And we were staying at this hotel, and the hotel decided to have an Easter egg hunt for guests and like the local kids. So for some reason, I didn't want to do it. I didn't like Easter egg hunts. I didn't like
Really?
no. And the reason why is I don't know. I'm sure you would agree with me, but I lacked confidence in myself with things like that when there was the spotlight on me. Especially when there was other like strange kids that I wasn't familiar with that I had to compete with.
See, I only ever did solo egg hunts, so my confidence about those is great.
Yeah, I mean, before that, my mom would set it up in the yard, and it was just my brother and I. But this time, it was all the local kids in Florida, in Orlando, Florida.
Wow.
One other funny side note: this was also the year in 1985 that I had this weird phobia of shorts. I don't know why. I don't know if I was self-conscious about my legs, but I had a fear, and I would wear pants even in like 90-degree weather in like direct sunlight, just sweating. As a kid, you rarely sweat, but just pouring sweat in these pants and like probably like a polo shirt or something, but it was way too hot. But anyway, so this Easter egg hunt,
Yes.
they lined us all up and gave us like a shitty, like one of those horrible baskets. And they counted down from 10, and I think they just blew a whistle. And as soon as that whistle blew, like the frenzy began. It was like chum being thrown in like a shark-infested water.
Wait, and were these real eggs or plastic eggs with like cash inside?
I don't think they put cash inside. But it's probably candy, if I had to guess. You know what? Well, I'll get to that in the end of the story. But so the frenzy begins, and I panicked, and I just stood there for like 30 seconds, which is a long time in an Easter egg hunt. And I'm looking around. I see my brother and I see my cousins, and they're like collecting eggs. And it kind of snapped where I'm just like, all right, I got to get going. I got to get some eggs before they're all collected.
I feel like I'm there right now.
But I'm panicked too. And as a kid, like when you see that craziness and the kids like picking up everything, I really thought I'm not going to find anything. And I was trying to spot an area that looked untouched.
This is like Fortnite.
Yeah, it really was like Fortnite. That's probably why I'm so bad at that game.
Well, also because you're 40. But keep going.
But I finally spotted an egg, and I grabbed it and put it in my basket. And I was just happy to have one because I don't want to be the kid that couldn't find anything. And as I turned around to like look for my brother again, a much larger kid just stood in my path, and we locked eyes.
They have a cave troll.
And then he just reached down into my basket and took my one egg and put it into his, which he already had a bunch of eggs. I don't know why he needed mine. And at that point, I tried to hold back the tears the best I could, but I just took off running as fast as I could back to the room. Mm-hmm. And of course, nobody was there. I don't know where my parents were, but I was just pounding on the door, screaming and hysterically crying until the hotel manager came and had to unlock the door for me to go in there and like hide under the bed. But to this day, I have no idea what was inside those eggs. I don't even remember my brother sharing his finds with me. So I have no idea.
Well, I don't know what that has to do with Rosemary's Baby. Let us talk about our history with this movie because this is one of my favorite films ever made.
So this is is it top 3 for you?
Top 3 for sure. It's like number 1 or number 2.
It's a great movie.
Yeah.
Up until watching it recently, it wasn't even on my radar. I mean,
okay.
My history with this movie was I remember you having the VHS. I would force myself to watch it probably at the end of high school, which was 97. And I kind of liked it. I half paid attention to it, but I certainly didn't love it. I think because it's a little slow moving.
It is slow moving for a teen.
In 1997, I had a lot to do.
In 1997, we needed films where a certain kind of vehicle was going a certain kind of speed or a bomb would blow up. So this might have been slow then, but this is a movie that gets better every time I see it. And I think I can explain some of the things that make it so great.
If anyone is listening to this and hasn't seen it,
Stop the podcast, rate it 1 star, and delete the podcast
1 star.
app. So, Rusty, my history with this movie is kind of funny because my parents would let me see any film I wanted. Like I could be 7 years old and see Last House on the Left. And my dad took me to like R-rated movies as a super young kid. There's a family legend about me seeing The Shining at a drive-in in like 1980 or whatever when I was like 2 years old. And this is the one film I was not allowed to see.
It's so clearly obvious why.
I mean, I can't even describe like when you grow up Catholic, movies like this, they hit you so much harder. Like The Exorcist is so much scarier as like a Catholic kid. The Omen, oh my God.
Growing up very relaxed religiously, I thought The Exorcist was a comedy.
Well, no, that's Repossessed you're thinking of, and I thought that was
Repossessed.
hilarious.
What's the scene that you loved again? It was
when it cuts to Mean Gene Okerlund, and he's like, "This is going to be the fight of the century." Yeah.
Boy. So I can't remember anybody our age being into it. So you were definitely one of the first.
I was a pioneer.
From 1968 until 1995, nobody knew about Rosemary's Baby, and then you came along.
Rusty, were there any movies you were not allowed to watch as a kid?
I was not allowed to watch anything Andrew Dice Clay.
Andrew Dice Clay.
And my dad was not into movies at all. I think the last movie he's seen in theaters was Jaws.
Wow.
So up until that point, he didn't see any movies.
They're not going to beat that one. I'm not going back. That was great. That was great. The shark. Oh, scary.
That almost sounded like
why'd the dog have to die? Maybe the dog survived. Who knows?
But for some reason on VHS, he had 2 movies on VHS. He had Howard Stern's Butt Bongo Fiesta. I don't know why he had that. But he also had The Adventures of Ford Fairlane. And I remember he would like watch Adventures of Ford Fairlane quite regularly. And he would always make me leave the room. He'd be like, go in the basement and play.
Oh! Rusty, I'll give the idiot's overview of this film.
I think it's very simple.
It was made in 1968, based on the novel by Ira Levin, who I feel like doesn't get enough appreciation if you think about all the classic stuff he did. I highly recommend the film Death Trap, which I love.
He loves it, people.
He loves it. But this was Ira Levin's like huge breakthrough book, which became a movie only 2 years later. Directed by Roman Polanski for coming into America for the first time, famously produced by Robert Evans for Paramount, and stars Mia Farrow as a woman who moves into a building with her actor husband, played by John Cassavetes, and the neighbors are weird and old, and she might be having the devil's baby.
I want to ask you though about this. I don't know if you know much about the history, but how edgy was the book at that time when it was released?
You could cut a penny in half. I don't know. I mean, it feels pretty edgy. I mean, I feel like the film was definitely kind of controversial. Maybe. I'm not sure, actually. I don't know much about if the movie was controversial or not. I just know that it freaked my parents the fuck out.
Did your parents see it in theaters or something? Or
yeah.
If you had kids, what would their lifetime ban be? What would you ban from them saying?
Literally nothing except for Hellgate.
Do you guys want to hear the rest of my story or not?
Well, I was kind of hoping it was over.
Well, it's not.
Rusty, it's a coincidence that Ira Levin called the character Roman Castevet, and then the film ended up being directed by Roman Polanski and starring John Cassavetes. Mm. Roman Castevet. Think about that.
I will.
Mia Farrow, obviously amazing in this movie, an iconic role. And, I've seen this movie a billion times. And I think this was the first time I realized she's wearing a wig before she cuts her hair, isn't she?
Yes, she is. I did read that bit of trivia, that she had short hair from Peyton Place, so it was a wig.
When she says in the film,
I've been to Vidal Sassoon,
the hair really was done by Vidal Sassoon.
Vidal Sassoon was huge back in the day.
John Cassavetes famously did not like the film, really feuded with Roman Polanski during the film. But I'll tell you one thing, I'd rather watch this than any John Cassavetes movie.
Yeah, I was about to say, what was his issues with the film? What was he feuding about?
He said famously that it was not art.
Don't tell me you paid for that.
How close are you with The Shining in relationship to the Rosemary's Baby as far as liking it? Like, where's Shining on
Definitely,
your scale?
yeah, it's definitely in the top 15. Rosemary Baby's top 5. This is top 15.
I want to know what your number 1 is. It's got to be Is it a Bergman film? That's all I need to know.
It is Miracle Mile. It is Miracle Mile, tied with Blood Rage.
Oh my god!
It's not cranberry sauce.
Interesting that you mentioned The Shining because Jack Nicholson was considered for the part of Guy, Rosemary's husband, and Roman Polanski said he's not the right choice because he seems evil to start with. And a lot of people criticize that about Stanley Kubrick's The Shining. So
yeah, Jack Nicholson seems almost evil in every movie he's in.
Okay.
they always say when a movie is good, like all the characters could be characters in their own movie. And I really feel like that in this. Like the universe just feels so rich, partially because we're experiencing it all from Rosemary's POV. But like Hutch, for instance, he seemed like he lived an interesting life before he ended up in this period. But Roman Castevet, the guy who is played by Stanley Blackmer, is that his name?
Sidney Blackmer.
Sidney. Hello, Sidney. I've always thought you could do a cool movie about him or like some kind of story. Because it's clear that
rich history with all his traveling.
You name a place, and I've been there. Go ahead, name a place.
Fairbanks, Alaska.
I've been there.
he's been traveling the world. Like he's been every single place on Earth. He spent 4 months in Alaska. So this whole time he's been like a witch and he's been trying to raise Satan's baby. So I feel like you could do a cool thing with him like in the 20s where he's like an evil Indiana Jones trying to resurrect Satan on this earth.
How come it took him so long to be successful, though? If he's been traveling the world.
If it was that easy to raise Satan, like half of the people in this city would be Satan.
You know, he's probably just telling every person what his intentions are. And then they either flee or they kill themselves. What do you think he was doing in Alaska for 4 months?
Maybe he was looking for tannis root. Maybe it only grows like in Arctic climates.
Yeah. I was going to say maybe he was getting a finger in his butt. The way just every state gets a finger in his butt.
I have no clue what you're talking about.
It's a reference to last episode, to April Fool's Day.
Oh, I don't listen to this podcast.
Did you even rate and review it?
I did.
But
But
you
it
have
is
to listen to April Fool's Day to get the reference. I'm referencing our own material, so it's that good, people.
Back to John Cassavetes' character, Guy, who
Did
is.
you like his character? I know, obviously, he's reprehensible for what he did, but
Yes, I do. I mean, I like his. I hate him, but I also I find him very interesting. In the Criterion booklet, there's like Ira Levin's like original notebook of like character bios or like a reproduction of it, and it says that Guy had a few homosexual experiences in the military, but he's now like repressed it and married Rosemary, which I think adds a whole other dimension to his character that if you think about that while you're watching the movie, really, really fits.
Yeah, he's pretty hands off even before he makes like a deal.
He is. And
he's definitely self-absorbed and
completely self-absorbed. And you could see that, maybe he repressed himself. He doesn't even know that he's repressed himself because like think about the age he's living in. And he's unfulfilled in that area. So he thinks like, if only I could become a famous actor, then I'm gonna be fixed, but life just doesn't work that way. But you could see like how a guy like him could be driven and not even think he's doing like such a bad thing.
It's also funny because he seems so uninterested in having a baby up until he makes a deal. And then he's just like, oh, we'll have 3 babies.
Mama, dad, poo-poo.
I love watching him from scene to scene where he's had a scene off screen, like his progression, and then imagining what the dialogue is in his scenes. Someone should do like a play, Rosemary's Baby, from his perspective.
Don't you want to know what happened the next night when he went back to the Cassavetes?
I feel like Roman had to be like, first he started him small. That first dinner, he's like, there are ways of getting things in the world that might surprise you. But I think that he must have told him that we're going to make Donald Baumgard blind or something like that. Because then that's like the big confirmation that something has happened.
But I felt like he was surprised by that news.
Well, I think he's surprised that it really happened.
Oh, okay. But I think when the Cassavetes first met him, they saw that he was such a easy mark. Like since he was so into himself. Like, oh, it's easy. All I have to do is like schmooze him a little bit with talking about some roles he's done, and to act impressed by his craft. Like, remember at first he was kind of reluctant and shy, but then like as soon as like Roman was able to point out certain things he did.
It had a wonderful authenticity to it.
No, come on.
No, I mean it.
Roman also baits him a little bit with bringing up religion.
No pope ever visits a city where the newspapers are on strike.
I heard he's going to postpone and wait till it's over.
Well, that's showbiz. That's exactly what it is. All the costumes, the rituals, all religions.
Oh, I think we're offending Rosemary.
No.
No, you're not religious, my dear, are you?
But I was brought up a Catholic. Now I don't know.
Another thing that's not in the film, but is that Rosemary's obviously a lapsed Catholic, but she's not talking to her family really because her parents disapprove of Guy, who is half Jewish, half Protestant.
Yeah. I picked some of that up, not to that extent, but it makes sense. What was the issue with Hutch, though? Remember I'm jumping ahead, but what religion was Hutch? Because during a scene later in the film, like he wasn't allowed. It says like Catholics only.
Yeah. Well, he
Is
wasn't
he Jewish
Catholic.
or
No. Hutch is a classic Protestant.
classic Protestant? How do you feel about that as a Catholic?
I don't. All I know is that when Hutch says, "I was tempted to tell them you were drug addicts or litter bugs," I thought to myself, "Man, drug addicts, that's totally fine to be these days, but a litter bug, that would be fucking horrible. Better to be like a genocidal warlord than to be a litter bug." Right? If you see someone littering, it's so shocking.
Oh yeah. You know what I wanted to ask you though? It seems like Guy didn't get the greatest deal.
That's true.
Like he was seduced by being offered a part in a play. Wouldn't you want more than that? Wouldn't you want to be offered greatness?
Yeah,
be like,
Rosemary does say that he, I think he's got another offer, maybe from Paramount. She says definitely an offer from a studio, and she says that he's getting big. So it's not just the play, but it does seem like, come on, a play.
What would it take you?
Oh, I'll take a play.
I mean, I like that it's kind of realistic that the coven isn't like so magical that they could like make crazy things happen. It's a little more realistic. There's a little bit of like voodoo and stuff in there.
They've put him on a path to like, he's going to be in a Star Wars movie. He's going to do a Marvel movie, but it's a couple years down the road. Rusty, I asked you to think about when you were 9 years old, and I didn't tell you why.
I did.
It's all going to make sense.
No.
But can you tell me about being 9 years old? What was life like?
I think it was like, for me, it was my personal judgment day where I became self-aware. I think at that age, I started to become where I cared more about like how I looked, about my clothes, where I picked out my own clothes and my hair, styled my hair. I got that spike going.
It is when you're like becoming less of a kid, sadly.
Yeah. Still played with toys a bit, but like I was definitely more into cultural things like film and stuff like that.
Okay. Cool. You're 9 years old.
No, but like definitely more advanced things. Like that's when Predator came out and like Lost Boys. I was not into baby kid movies like anymore.
Oh, okay, yeah, that makes sense.
I think it was also around the time because I was looking at bands that got big, or like when records came out, and that was definitely like a time when I started to get into music more instead of just like listening to what everybody else was listening to.
Mm-hmm.
But one of the big things, remember Walk Like an Egyptian?
Of course. Yeah.
Remember how big that song was? That came out in 87. Remember all the dopes doing the Egyptian dance? And you know what else was the big thing in 1987 for both of us? It's a very impactful year for us. Aerosmith's Angel came out. We were both touched very deeply by that one.
We were. I can't believe I was 9 years old and like thinking about that song with girls in my class, like in my imagination.
Yeah. I told Jen that was one of the first songs that made me cry, thinking of how beautiful it was. Is there a more perfect song? And plus the video is kind of sexy too, so it had that.
It was also the big year of I feel like Nintendo really came on that year.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Like that was when it started hitting like a higher level.
Now you're playing with power.
And was that in the era of like the early skateboarding with Eric?
Oh, for sure. Yeah, that's when I was like rocking a lot of like the surf gear, like Hobie and TNC Surf and like Ocean Pacific. Remember those brands?
Mm-hmm.
I was wearing a lot of that. Yeah, definitely starting to get into skateboarding. Horrible though, but
Yeah, I could picture it perfectly. And now, Rusty, do you know that you are closer to Ruth Gordon's age than you are to that?
is that the setup?
You're closer to being Ruth Gordon in this film than you are to being that 9-year-old who skateboarded, watched film, and played NES.
Am I closer to winning an Oscar like she did, or am I as far away from that as possible?
You're as far away from that as possible.
I loved her in this movie.
She's great. She's great. I mean, everyone's great, but she's great. She's always doing something. Like, even when she has no dialogue, even when she's kind of just like a random person in the scene, like towards the end when she's in the crowd scenes, she's always doing something interesting. I mean, I really feel like everyone in this movie has so much depth.
She's so good at her character that I was getting stressed out when she was just barging in. I was just like, I feel it. I could feel that agony of dealing with somebody just setting up shop and start knitting in your living room. Like, why you want to do your own shit?
Yeah.
Like, come on. But yeah, I like how spacey she is and at times and how dismissive. It's just like everybody knows that person in their life. Probably their one of their grandparents growing up.
It's just so cool because you could see her character, you could see Roman, like Laura Louise, who which she mentions that one detail about her life that she used to have periods so bad that her husband would have to give her gin through a straw. And you could just imagine her as like a nosy neighbor who then got into Satanism because she was like, kind of always like bugging someone else. And you're kind of just like, how did they all arrive here at this place? But it's interesting to think about.
Did you ever see the movie Cloak and Dagger?
Of course.
With Daphne Coleman and the kid from E.T. What's his name? Henry Thomas?
Well, yes, but did you just call him Daphne Coleman?
What is it, Dabney?
Dabney.
What is his name?
Dabney.
Dabney, okay. Dabney Coleman. Is he still alive?
Yes, he is.
That one. Good for Dabney. But do you remember that movie well enough? Do you remember the old couple that kind of shields Henry Thomas at first, but then betrays him?
Yeah, I saw this in the theater, and that moment was terrifying.
Didn't they kind of remind you of the Castavetes?
Oh, completely.
Do you think they were like kind of inspired by Rosemary's Baby?
I think after Rosemary's Baby, you couldn't have creepy old people without kind of referencing it. Another notable cast member, Victoria Vetri.
She's notable, but only in the film for about 2 minutes.
Yeah, but it's interesting just because Mia Farrow mistakes her for Victoria Vetri, who she really was. And she's like, oh no, everyone thinks I am her, which is another kind of weird Vidal Sassoon style crossover to real life.
What was the reason that Roman Polanski kept that joke in, or put that joke in the movie, that she was Victoria Vetri?
In the book, which Roman Polanski famously adapted incredibly faithfully, to the point where he would call Ira Levin and say, you mentioned the New Yorker was on the table. Like, what New Yorker issue was it? In the book, it says that she looked a lot like Piper Laurie. And so he couldn't get her. So I guess he thought, I'll get another actress and then have her identified as the real actress. And then that'll give it that same kind of, it'll recreate the moment in the novel where it looks like a famous actress.
I'm sorry. I thought you were Victoria Vetri, the actress. I'm sorry.
It's all right. A lot of people think I'm Victoria. I don't see any resemblance.
So she, quite significantly, she's like the original Rosemary. She, the Castavetes have taken her in off the street. She says she was all whacked out on dope and they've given her like a new life, but clearly they are recruiting her to be the first carrier of Satan's baby, or who knows how many carriers have come before. And she ends up being found on the pavement, having jumped out the window. But a lot of people debate, did she jump or was she pushed? And I have always thought she jumped, but now I think she was pushed.
I'm still thinking she jumped, but I'm interested to hear why you think she was pushed.
So the book is super faithful in its adaptation, as we said. I mean, the movie is super faithful to the book. There's a part in the book where after John Cassavetes hears that he got the part, he says he's going to go for a walk. And then Rosemary is looking out the window and notices that he never leaves the building, but says to herself, he must have left via the other exit. And so we established that there's 2 exits to this building. Just the timing of the Castevets walking up when they do, it just seems like they could have pushed her, gone out the other exit, and then come around and kind of did like the good cop, bad cop thing that they do. Because Roman is completely, they're like, take a look at this note, and is this her handwriting? And he's like, absolutely, positively. And Minnie, Ruth Gordon's character, is more like, I can't believe it. It just seems like a really convenient way to play it if you're them. What do you think that suicide note said, by the way, if she did kill herself?
It probably said, forget about the killer bees. Wait until you hear about giant mosquitoes.
I think it said, my elderly roommates are Satan's wingman.
I like that too. But the reason why I think she fell or she jumped isn't there a sequence where Rosemary hears them talking or hears Minnie telling Roman, like, you should have listened to me?
Yeah.
Like I told you in advance that she wouldn't be open-minded.
Yeah. So
she wasn't receptive. So they had to get rid of her.
Yeah.
They took her in because she didn't have any family. Well, she did actually have a brother in the military, but do you think they knew about that, or do you think they played it off that they didn't?
No, I think they were trying to get someone, in the way that a serial killer kills people who are at the fringes of society because they think they could get away with it. I think that was their mission here.
But do you think they were surprised when Rosemary said, "Oh, she had a brother in the army"?
Well, it's always funny to me the way that Roman says it should be easy to find him. Like his delivery of that line, I'm like, is he saying that it won't be? Is he saying that it will be? Because the details they give are so vague.
Know anything else about this brother except he's in the Navy?
It should be easy to find him.
How many skeletons do they have around the world? How many people do you think they've murdered?
They must have quite a few, and they must have some kids who were like, they came out only like 8% Satan.
Did you read up on Victoria Vetri's IMDb trivia? She had a pretty interesting life.
Go on.
Did you know? I'm sure you knew if you read, but she was supposed to be at the Tate, or not Tate's house, whoever house it was, the night that Sharon Tate was murdered.
Oh wow, I did not know that.
And she canceled because she was ill. It wasn't there the thing that there was other famous people that were supposed to be there.
Ryan Gosling.
Oh, there you have it. But the thing I want to bring up in the beginning when Hutch is talking about the Branford building, which is a fictional building for people that don't know.
Yes, of course. Famously,
where was it actually shot?
The Dakota building.
Dakota, okay. But he's talking about some of the tenants there throughout history in the early 1900s.
It's where the Trench sisters conducted their little dietary experiments. And Keith Kennedy held his parties. Adrian Mercado lived there, too. So did Pearl A.
Who were the Trench sisters?
The Trench sisters were 2 proper Victorian ladies. They cooked and ate several young children, including a niece.
Oh, lovely.
Adrian Mercado practiced witchcraft. He made quite a splash in the 90s by announcing that he'd conjured up the living devil. Apparently people believed him, so they attacked and nearly killed him in the lobby of the Branford.
You're joking.
Later, the Keith Kennedy business began, and by the 20s, the house was half empty.
Would that turn you off from renting an apartment?
Well, that's an interesting question. Not really.
You like it?
No, I don't like it. I just, I don't know. I don't think...
I remember where I grew up, the house down the street, there was somebody that hanged himself in the basement. And I always thought that house must have been haunted, but never heard any stories from it.
Mm.
Oh, how about that apartment, though, that they rent? Geez, that's a gorgeous New York City apartment.
Wow. Yeah. It's quite epic.
How much do you think that would cost in today's?
$15,000 a month.
Probably, right?
And it was famously reduced in size, as Elijah Cook, another famous old actor who's the realtor, explains in the opening scene.
What was his big movie? I didn't look him up. I know him from something, and I couldn't place him.
I wish I looked him up because this is just a total guess, but I think he's in The Hustler.
He was in The Maltese Falcon. Is that what you're thinking of? He's also in The Killing, the Stanley Kubrick film, House on Haunted Hill, The Big Sleep.
Interesting, House on Haunted Hill, because I'm pretty sure that's a William Castle movie, and he was the producer of this film, and famously has a cameo in the phone booth scene late in the movie.
The other thing I want to talk about quickly, the apartment belonged to the 89-year-old Miss Gardenia, who died of a stroke. Now, what's your theory behind that? Do you think that she was a member of the coven and they killed her?
She definitely was a member of the coven, because the note is found that says, "I can no longer associate myself," and it's clear that she had some kind of break with them, because she's like blocked up her closet.
Yeah. Who do you think moved that secretary? Do you think it was her? Do you think it was her son?
That's an interesting question.
I think, there's a theory that I read that seems pretty cool, that the coven moved it themselves in order to prevent her from opposing them using Terry as the bearer of the Antichrist.
Oh,
so they didn't want her communicating with Terry, so they did it. That would be pretty interesting.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
I've got another theory you'll only hear on Arches of Podcast.
Go on.
An interesting line, I thought, was after the first dinner. Also, I just want to point out one of the best moments in the movie is when Rosemary and Minnie are washing the dishes, and Rosemary looks into the doorway and just sees the smoke. And that's the first conversation that John Cassavetes is having with Roman. And when she goes back in, the way that they look at each other is like, so like, just the way that people look at each other in this movie, like when you later realize like they're all in on it, it's just so interesting. It makes little moments so much more significant.
Yeah, I rewatched that before recording, and watching that scene again, it's such a great scene.
Yeah, it's like another all.
And you don't need words. You don't need that dialogue to know.
John Cassavetes has so many good moments where, just to jump around real quick, like he says to Rosemary, like, "I've been tearing my hair out about my," and then he pauses and he's like, "career."
Yes, I have. I've been tearing my hair out over my career. Let's have a baby.
But it's clear he's been tearing his hair out about the deal he's made to like give their baby to Satan.
Yeah.
And also, I mean, the great moment where Rosemary is like, "He just kicked, feel my stomach," and then he like pulls his hand away really quick.
I also like at the hip party that Rosemary throws, that he's like following her around to make sure she doesn't get any advice from any of her friends.
Oh yeah, I love when they close the door.
Yeah, and he's just like watching.
But before Rosemary has that party, and she says it's a very special party, you have to be under 60 to get in. Rusty, remember we used to get Phantom Menace toys, like not Phantom Menace toys, Power of the Four Star Wars figures.
Yes, that I remember.
We're closer to being barred from Rosemary's party than we are to having Power of the Four Star Wars toys.
But we'll be a hip 60, I hope.
That's true. That's true. Wait, so back to after the first dinner. This is something I haven't seen anywhere on the internet, but I think it's kind of a funny idea. After they get back from the dinner, they're kind of shit talking them a little bit because they're so old, and Rosemary says,
Only 3 dinner plates that match. And all that beautiful, beautiful silver.
What do you think that line implies? I'll just tell you what I think it implies. Is that
go on.
They have other china that they're holding back from them. The silver they could let them see, but the other china has to be like devil themed in some way, like some kind of satanic china, and that's why they brought out the plates that are like their shit plates.
You know what I want to ask you though? Is this the same thing though that, when she's talking about the paintings, she said that they had paintings that were moved and replaced with something else?
Yeah, exactly.
Was that because they were Satan themed?
Yeah.
They took them down and put up something else?
Yeah. At the end of the film, you see them when she's coming through the secret passage.
Oh, that's right.
I'm thinking about doing that next time I have someone over just to freak them out. They'll be like, "Why are all these like hangers on the wall empty?" And I'll just act like super like freaked out. Like, no reason.
You should try that. Then you could bring out your robotic rat.
Yeah, exactly.
Run scary across the floor. I want to ask you about the Tanis route though, because the girl Terry that dies, she was wearing the charm.
Mm-hmm.
So did she embrace any aspect of that, or did she think it was really just a good luck charm?
No, I think it was just like with Rosemary, she thought it was a good luck charm.
But it's funny. Like she didn't like it though. But she's such a biddable character that Guy forces her to wear it,
Yeah.
and she eventually does. But same thing with like the dessert when they have their romantic dinner, and he forces her to kind of eat the dessert, but she doesn't want to.
Mm-hmm.
She's very reluctant and pretends to, which I think that's another great scene in the.
Oh, of course, yeah. The chalky undertaste, and he's just such a bully about it. He's like, "Eat that moose." I've never liked moose personally, but I love when in the dream sequence the bishop guy is like, "Oh yeah, here you were bit by a mouse," and you're like,
"Yeah."
That's such a good dreamlike thing to get moose and mouse confused.
Yeah, well, she only ate some of the moose, so she was kind of in a lucid state, right?
Yeah, I think that's why she like wakes up and stuff.
And she said, like, what's her big line that
This is no dream. This is really happening.
What did you think of all that that surreal imagery?
I think it's one of the great sequences in film. I mean, I think it captures a dreamlike state so much better than most movies.
Oh, for sure. What's your theory on what it all means, besides the obvious of where she's kind of losing her innocence? But what do you make of the yacht, where the beginning of when she's floating out on the ocean on the mattress, then she's on the yacht? Is that part of the affluence of Guy? Like the lifestyle that Guy embraces?
I guess that could be. Just crossing water is always like a kind of entering some kind of liminal transitional state.
Well, eventually she goes below the boat and it turns into like a hellish nightmare.
That's what I imagine long boat travel would be like.
Hellish nightmare. When back to when they're eating the moose, when Guy's like shoveling the moose into his mouth and he's making like that face that I could not read his face in that scene. Like he was rushing through eating it, and he was also looked a little bit anguished and stuff.
Well, I've always wondered if he's like pounding. He's pounding. I mean, he's anguished because he doesn't know what the fuck's gonna happen later that night. But I've always wondered if he's.
Is it also because this is like the part of the plan that has to go perfectly?
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, I feel like I've always wondered why he's pounding the moose though, because part of me is like, did he have to go under some kind of spell, to participate in the ritual?
He is naked with, but maybe he was just stress eating.
Yeah, that's true.
I don't know. I mean, this is by far the most fucked up scene in the movie. It's probably also the scariest scene.
Yeah.
But imagine like having like selling out your spouse, but also having to watch it.
Yeah, that would be pretty harrowing.
And chant along.
I do like when he kind of looks like reluctant to sing and like Minnie like elbows him or whatever, and it's like, oh man, and he has to sing too.
He has to sing. What about the next morning? The way Guy plays that scene when like she has the scratches on her. You can see the panic in him in the quick thinking. He's just like, oh, I already filed them down. I took care of my nails. Sorry about that.
Yeah, that's such an uncomfortable scene.
And he's
God,
and then he's just digging himself into a deeper hole.
Yeah, I know. He's like, it was kind of fun in a necrophiliac kind of way. You're like, whoa, what the fuck would you say that?
I know. And he's just like, oh, I was drunk too. I just like, it's all the things that a creepy guy would say. But yet, like it doesn't raise red flags with her because she is from like the Midwest and she's, has that Catholic upbringing. She's a bit naive that she never distrusts her husband.
Yeah.
Like all the distrust she has with everybody else, she's smart where she picks up that sense that there's outside forces that are against her. But when it all comes back to her husband, she just like instinctively trusts him.
It's true. And I think she was 19 in this movie. So she's like 19 or 20 in this film. And I think in the movie, she's supposed to be 24. Still, even though people got married younger then, but still so young. Which really heightens her vulnerability. At 19, you were buying Star Wars figures thinking that you would retire wealthy on them. At 19, I had a screen name Watto because I'd heard about the character. I thought he was going to be great. And then, like Rosemary, my innocence was shattered. Come on, what do you want to have a baby for? I sell you, baby. No need for Satan.
Oh, boy.
We always end up back on the Phantom Menace.
Imagine the day we have to discuss it. Where we circle to.
Oh, that'd be a great episode. I wanted to tell a quick story. I don't know if I'm going to keep it in though, because it's sexual.
What's the story you got?
Yeah, I've got a sexual story. So there was someone years ago that I used to have sex with whenever I'd be broken up with someone, and it was always like, we got along super well. We had a really good sexual connection. We never hung out outside this context, but it was like super fun in that way. And there was one time I was really into the person I was dating, and they unexpectedly dumped me. And to cover my pain, I like went over her apartment immediately. And she was like, "When did you guys break up?" And I was like, "If I'm being honest, it was 10 minutes ago." And we started hooking up, and I was going down on her, and I just started thinking about the breakup. I started thinking about my life, and I started crying while I was going down on her.
I never hear stories of you crying. So,
and I've like only cried a few times, and this was one of them, into a vagina. And then a couple years later, she was like, "Man, like, I can't believe that time you cried in my vagina." She's like, "Sometimes, like you have to like go down on me and like get me off to like make up for that." And this is like years later, and I was like, "All right, I'm gonna do it. Really gonna do it. I'm like gonna make you. I'm gonna like make up for this." And so she was house sitting for, I won't say who, but a legend in the business, and this all took place in this person's bed. But we were watching Rosemary's Baby, and I swear to God, I started going down on her in the very first scene. I was still going down on her by the time it got to the dream sequence. And I was like, "Oh my God." I was like, "This is like 45 minutes into the film." I was like, "I might be here like for the rest of my life." And just as that was happening, and I'm like, it's like, "Sorry, man, Catholics only." And it's like, typhoon, and like all that music going in your head. And I almost started crying again. And it was such a Catholic moment. Speaking of Catholic moments, Rusty, no more Catholic moment than when Rosemary says, "Oh, please don't change the program on my account," during the dream sequence.
Yeah. I'm sure you can relate. But I got to backtrack on this story.
Yes.
45 minutes of oral sex.
45 minutes.
I don't want to sound like a bad lover here, but like my jaw starts to hurt after like 15 minutes.
Oh, yeah.
15 minutes.
I was eating baby food for a week after that.
I don't know what your technique is, but things start to hurt. Things start to lock up. It's just, you can't even talk afterwards.
My technique is like they say about people like in firefights: spray and pray. I don't even know what that means.
I love it.
Rusty, when Mia Farrow was talking to, here's a little known fact for you. When Mia Farrow was talking to Hutch, and she says, "I bet even Laurence Olivier is self-centered." Do you know that when he saw the movie in the theater, and when he saw that moment, he just started screaming and swinging. He just started. 18 people were wounded in that theater. Laurence Olivier just swinging like a madman.
I'd feel honored though to be that big, to be slammed in a movie.
Oh yeah,
just being self-centered. But for everybody knows that Laurence Olivier was probably self-centered.
Rusty, for all the praise we're giving this movie, I will say there's one bad thing about it. And I'm going to reveal that later in the show.
Now I'm just going to wonder for the next little bit. No,
that's why I did that. And this bad thing is going to shock you. But before we go on, so Rosemary first goes to Charles Grodin. This was kind of his first big break for him. And then she is sent to Dr. Saperstein, who is like the big obstetrician in New York City. And he is also in the cult. Now, Rusty, he is such an acclaimed doctor. Kind of interesting because this movie, Roman Polanski obviously fled the law in the 70s and is a very controversial figure.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, this movie is like one of the best movies in terms of like depicting someone who's being gaslit, depicting like the ways that men can manipulate women, and also depicting how someone's reputation can cover like their evil, like the way that no one is going to disbelieve Dr. Saperstein because he has like the best rep, even the way they play her, where when Roman overhears that he's like, "Abe Saperstein, one of the best doctors," Yeah. But my question to you is, Dr. Saperstein, did he ask Satan for these great baby delivering powers?
He had to. He's so well respected. Everybody knows him.
Yeah, that's how he got to that. That's what he used his wish on. Interesting thing to use a wish on.
How many doctors can you name besides Dr. Oz? Like everybody.
I can only name my childhood doctor, who's obviously dead by now.
Yeah, everybody knows. Like, didn't Hutch know him, or somebody knew him? That was just like, how does that character know him?
He delivered 2 of Hutch's 3 daughters.
That's right. And then, of course, Dr. Hill knew him.
Yeah. Dr. Hill completely another famous example about how faithful the movie is to the book. In the book, it mentions that when she goes back to Dr. Hill, he's got a faint mustache. And then that's why Charles Grodin kind of has the mustache in the later scene when Rosemary goes back to him, which is beginning to suspect the cult is after her.
I wonder if anybody ever questioned that. Like, we don't really need to do everything from the book.
It's funny because they say that Roman Polanski just didn't know didn't know that he could make changes. One more thing about Dr. Saperstein. I love the part when he's talking about books because it's so clearly that, doctors complain about Google now, about patients Googling things, but it's so clear that books used to be the same exact thing.
Oh, I know. Did you ever Google any health issues that you had or concerns?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I certainly have, but I don't want to know the outcome.
A few years ago, I was having neck pain. Like I kinked my neck and it just wasn't going away. And it was something with pressure on the nerve. And sorry. And there was like pressure on the nerve. So I looked it up and everything I looked up said neck cancer. And it was just neck cancer. That's a thing. I went to my doctor and was just like, I don't want to freak out, but everything's telling me neck cancer. And he just laughed in my face. It was just like, oh, you've been Googling. I'm just like, yeah. He's just like, don't do that ever again. But of course,
well, I'll tell you something that's going to horrify you. I once had just all kinds of pimples on my dick. All kinds of pimples on my dick.
Wow, that's very
like
personal.
I've never seen before. And I went to like the clinic and I was like, hey, look at this. And the doctor's like, you're looking at your penis too much. It's nothing. It's irritated. I was like, this has never happened. And she's like, you touch your penis too much. And I was like, that's all? And
so what was it? Or you don't know? It just went away?
It just went away. Like she told me it was just irritated.
Was it jock itch?
No, I don't know what it was, but it was just, I mean, it looked like you would think this was an STD. But it's hard. It's hard looking up because you look up STDs and the ones that are visible can be quite upsetting.
Yeah, they really are.
So then your Google research stops pretty soon. Back to the film.
Yes.
One of the most classic moments is when she's in the phone booth. I love that scene. That whole scene is great for some reason.
That's such a tense moment.
It is. One thing funny about this movie, we don't get too much into technique here, but so much of this movie is all one shot. And like, you don't really notice it as much. It's not showy in the way that things that are one shot, a lot of times these days, I'll be like, oh, it's just one shot here. But things play out in like one shot with very few cuts, but it just works really well.
Yeah, it does work really well. Because until you said that, I would never have thought of that because each scene.
Yeah, like so many scenes are like, for instance, the scene where she's with Victoria Vetri in the basement. Mm-hmm. I think there's one cut in that, but it's almost all one shot. The phone booth, I'm pretty sure that's all one shot.
Do you credit that to the actors though, or do you credit that to the directing, or what would you credit that to?
I credit to both because I mean it can only be both, but it's like when you have actors that are that good, you can get away with it.
You know what I wonder about the tannis root? Obviously, it's a fictional herb. But I wonder how many like satanic cults, these up and coming cults in the 60s that like read it and was just like, we need to get tannis root for our cult.
There are probably people still looking to this day. Tanis was the city in Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Where in Tunisia?
Yeah, when he's like talking about whatever city got like buried in the sandstorm or whatever happened to it. Mm-hmm. It was Tanis.
Oh, any connection?
There's actually a long article, which I did not read, that someone wrote about Tanis root and its connections possibly to the Bible and what it, where it could, what the origin could be.
What's it really called? It's called something else, like devil's pepper, I think.
Oh yeah, but they're both fictional.
Yeah, of course. No, what do you think about the Tanis root causing Rosemary to be pallid and anemic and sickly and stuff.
I don't know that it's the Tannis root doing that.
What do you think it is? Is it just the baby she's carrying?
I think it's like the baby. I think it's like the smoothie. I mean, I think it's kind of everything. The Tannis root, I've always felt like it's just the broth, you know?
But no, but I think I'm going to try to correct you on this one. Hear me out.
Okay.
Because she drinks the smoothie and she has this unbearable pain. Isn't that part of their plan that they want to keep her isolated from the outside world? So by drinking this, she's in continual pain, so she's bedridden and can't communicate. So she never has anybody questioning her.
Yeah.
So they have her completely under control. Because when she stops drinking that smoothie, she starts to instantly feel better. But when she goes back to drinking it, here's the thing, and she's fine with it. At that point, she's already, further along with the pregnancy that Minnie took out that element that was making her sick. They already had what they needed.
Yeah. I like that theory. I've always thought, but the part when she stops hurting and then she like feels it move and she's like, it moved.
Yeah.
That's like Satan stopping the pain, right? Because Satan's like, look, I gotta stop this pain or else she's suspecting too much, basically. So the devil kind of steps in there.
See, I don't know what the extent of Satan's powers are. Is that one of his powers?
Well, I don't think he'd define it in such concrete terms, but I think it does feel kind of like whatever the opposite of divine intervention is. That's Satan stepping in there.
Yeah, I like that it's not too supernatural though, where like
the
powers are like ridiculous. I feel like if they remade the movie, it would be ridiculous.
Oh yeah, of course. Or there's been like Ira Levin towards the end of his life wrote a sequel, Son of Rosemary, and it's always been like, or there's also the TV movie sequel, Whatever Happened to Rosemary's Baby. That is so much less interesting, like for the baby to actually become like a devil kid and all that shit. Yeah. I do wonder, what is Guy? Guy is like, okay, so I'm going to become a famous actor. The devil will be reincarnated. He's like, I really got to worry about the devil until he's like in his 20s probably. Mm. So by then I'll already be like a huge star. So then I'll use like my pulpit as like a huge George Clooney level star to be like, Satan is a bad guy.
Imagine,
but it's kind of funny imagining what he's thinking this whole time.
Maybe his plan is that like, the Satanists will just take care of him.
Oh, that is his plan. I mean, I think their whole plan is that they were going to say the baby died.
Yeah.
And then Rosemary and Guy were going to have like, just have another one.
You would think Guy would tell the coven that like, the walls are kind of paper thin. You got this baby crying. She's going to hear it.
That's funny. That's one of the only logical fallacies in the movie, or logical flaws in the movie. You would think that he would tell them that.
Oh, you know what I want to ask you?
Mm-hmm.
Is Dr. Hill in on it at all, or is he just concerned for the way Rosemary's acting and trusts Dr. Saperstein because he's reputable?
Yeah, the latter. He's definitely not in on the coven, but he is easily. He's a young doctor on the rise, so he's like easily seduced by Saperstein's reputation.
Yeah, so especially seeing somebody coming in that's like 9 months pregnant, that's frantic. I'm sure you're trying to look out for her best interests.
But when we get to the end, and there's the big scene where the coven is with the baby, and they're celebrating, and Rosemary comes in and is horrified. First of all, that's an incredible scene. Like I love the way that she's very slowly recognized by everyone in there. Like it takes a while for everyone to kind of realize what's going on.
I love when she's like surveying everything that's taking place and she looks at the baby. But I love when she like sits down and Guy comes over to her and he tries to like reconcile. He's just like, we'll have another baby. And she just spits in his face. Like that.
I love that, awesome. Dude. Yeah. Spitting in his face is the most appropriate thing she could have done. Only situation where I would condone someone really doing that.
Of course. I think he knows he deserves it too, because he just kind of like backs off.
When she oh yeah, no, completely. The part where she comes in with a knife and then she is so in shock that she drops the knife and it sticks in the floor. Mm-hmm. And then Minnie pulls it out of the floor and like rubs the mark. But it reminded me, this is a really random memory, but many years ago, with my father's company was having a Christmas party, and the rumor, it was at the Milleridge Inn.
Oh, that's a great place.
Yeah, it's a historic landmark on Long Island. It was like built in like the 1600s or something. It was one of the oldest buildings on Long Island. And rumors began to spread that my dad had gotten a inspirational speaker. And so various people who worked for the company were like, if your dad got an inspirational speaker, I'm going to freaking flip out. And like people were just like angry about this. And I was like, I don't know anything about it. And so my father got up and he was like, when I hired Yvonne, she said she was magical. And now for someone who really is magical. And he brought out a magician. I've
heard a lot.
Were you there for this magician?
No, I wasn't. No, I was not.
Okay. This is not even the point of my story, but I'm just going to say it while I'm here. So this magician is like imagine like a kind of seemed a little coked up, had like a beard. My dad met him like on the subway in Manhattan, and bald guy as I will be tomorrow. And here is how he started one of his tricks. He's like, does anyone who died tragically young? Anyone in the audience? Anyone died tragically young? And so he had like, if people had an answer to that, like they wrote it down on a piece of paper or something like that. Anyway, long story short, there was a guy who worked there who was like in his 50s, and he wrote down the name of someone who had died as he was like when he was like a teenager. This guy Gino, I remember his name. And the magician was like, Gino. And this guy was like, oh my God. And when everyone was like leaving the event, this very Long Island guy said to the older guy, he was like, yeah, how do you think he did that? How do you think that magician knew about your friend Gino? And he's like, either he found a way to open that envelope, or I don't know, he's in touch with some dark forces. So, okay, but that's not even the point of my story. The point of my story is that the next year, my father again got a magician, but this time, I think due to budget cuts, it was my cousin Brendan. And Brendan had some trick where he had to throw a knife into the floor. And so he has like a switchblade or something. And he keeps trying to throw it into the floor of the Milleridge Inn, which is like a building from the 1600s. And as he's doing this, he keeps like throwing it wrong, and it's like bouncing off the ground. He's like, oh shit. Oh, he tries again. He's like, oh, fuck. But employees start gathering in the doorway, watching in horror as Brendan is trying to throw a switchblade into the thing. And my father's just watching, like beaming. And I'm just like, get me out of here. But Rusty, speaking of that last scene, I've got to reveal the one bad thing about the movie Rosemary's Baby.
This is the moment we've all been waiting for. You teased us earlier in the episode.
The one bad thing about Rosemary's Baby is there's a shot where Roman says,
lives! The year is one!
And he puts his arms up. There's a guy standing next to him. He is standing way too close. Now, you're thinking you're like, Ed, you're crazy. Watch that moment. The guy's nose is like against his elbow. When you see it, you're going to love it. Too bad this is not a video podcast.
Is this why you only gave the movie 4.5 stars on Letterboxd? Because of that one moment?
Wow, that's bullshit. I got to up that to 5.
Oh, you know what I failed to mention earlier during the rape scene? And did you ever see the extended version?
No, I didn't even know there was one.
Apparently all the older characters that are standing around her as Satan's penetrating her, they're all naked and you see everything. Like you see a bunch of old naked people.
Okay. Very much. I was going to say earlier, that movie, The Sentinel, which has some value.
Yeah.
So Rosemary's Baby.
Mm-hmm. Oh, for sure. You know, back to this last scene though, which you forgot to mention, that she eventually embraces being the mother to her child since it is hers.
Mm-hmm.
But I had a false memory because I haven't seen this movie in over 20 years.
Everyone has this false memory
that you see the baby.
Yeah.
I know. I was telling Jen before we watched. She's just like, "Do you see the baby? Is it a puppet?" I'm just like, "I'm pretty sure it's bad. I'm pretty sure it looks like a ghoulie, like a ghoulie that goes to college."
I'm like Roman Castevet. I'm like, I've been all over this world, and people all over this world have told me that. Oh, I've been told that you see the baby in England. I've been told in Australia that you see the baby. People have sworn to me that you see the baby.
It's like that's like people saying about Sinbad being in Shazam. So as we're building up, because I watched this with Jen, and she actually liked, this is one of the few movies we've discussed that she liked.
Cool.
And we're leading up, and she's like, "Do you see the baby?" I'm just like, "Yeah, but don't worry, it's like for a second," and then it didn't happen. I was like, "All right, I was wrong. You don't see the baby." I probably said that because you do see Satan for a second. You see his yellow eyes.
He has his father's eyes.
Like a doll's eyes.
I don't know what doll you mean. Maybe Lionel.
He did, yes. But yeah. So and it's funny that a lot of people had that same thought or same memory. I'm glad you don't say it because that would have, even if it looked cool, it would have looked like Hellboy nowadays. Is it described? I wonder if it's described in the book. Do you know the book?
I mean, I don't really remember, but I'm pretty sure it is.
It has yellow eyes. We know that.
Yeah.
Huge
you got to assume it's like the way that the elderly people are like, look at his feet, look at his, those got to be traits that you would grow out of. Because I always thought it was dumb, the idea that like if Satan's baby is coming back, he's got to like look good. He can't like have hoofs.
A tail.
I will be the first president with hoofs. Let me be clear. Titus strip. I can't even. Never mind. I'm forcing it. My pointy tail does not mean a thing.
Oh man, I don't have anything else.
No, I don't have anything else either.
But if you haven't seen Rosemary's Baby, definitely check it out. After listening to this episode, rate and review. Check out Rosemary's Baby.
We'll be back in 2 weeks with
a pick of mine.
A pick of yours, which I think is going to begin with the letter P. For some reason, every choice you gave me that you were considering began with the letter P.
That's true. That is true. And you felt positive about them. You were receptive to that.
Ooh, positive, yes.
Well, some of the other movies I throw out, you're like, what?
Well, I meant because positive begins with P as well.
Oh my God.
This is like fucking Sesame Street now, people. Oh!